The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its host, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss the murder in your family on this podcast, please be sure to visit themurderinmyfamily.com for more information. You can support this podcast by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. This episode may contain unsettling material or subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you for joining me for episode 38 of The Murder in My Family. If you find that you enjoy this podcast, please take a minute to rate and review it wherever you listen to your podcast, so that the show can continue to grow and reach new listeners. To learn more about the show or the cases we discuss, please visit themurderinmyfamily.com. You can also find us on Twitter with the handle @MurderInMyFam, or by searching for the Murder in My Family podcast on Facebook. If you'd like to support this show through a Patreon donation, it's always appreciated, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. Benefits of supporting the show on Patreon include early access to ad-free episodes of the show, plus bonus content not heard in regular episodes. Support may also include thank you cards, stickers, and more. If you prefer to, you can also support the show through a PayPal donation by visiting paypal.me/themurderinmyfamily. In each episode, I'll give shout-outs to any new supporters. And thank you to all of the supporters that generously donate to help keep the show growing and improving. Thank you, and now on with the show. Through the first 37 episodes of this podcast, we've discussed heartbreaking cases of every kind. While each case is unique, the common thread linking every episode together is that for every murder we discuss, a family member of that victim is missing their loved one. In every episode of The Murder in My Family, you hear from those family members who open up and share with us their dark and sad journeys. In episode 1 of The Murder in My Family, Bill Thomas recounted how his sister Kathy's 1986 murder became the first in a series of murders in Virginia dubbed the Colonial Parkway Murders.
Mike, at the risk of sounding like every other proud big brother around the world, Kathy was an amazing person. She was 27 years old at the time of her death, and she'd already accomplished a great deal. So if you're picturing Kathy in your mind, you have to picture this incredibly vibrant, amazing, funny, brilliant person. She had bright red hair.
In episode 6, Mike and Becky Patty talked about the heartbreaking murder of their granddaughter, Libby German, who was murdered alongside her friend, Abby Williams, in Delphi, Indiana, in February 2017.
Libby was a people person. She, and athletic. She was involved in everything. She wanted to try everything. She tried to make people happy. And the rest of the time, usually it was weekends. It was family. When she wasn't into sports and stuff, it was family and friends.
In episode 14, Mona Caller talked about her sister Anita Dunn's senseless 2016 murder in Missouri, and detailed how the murderer in that case had a history of murder.
As she was the older sister, I didn't grow up with the same friends as she did. She would take me places, end up dropping me off. I was probably the little sister that nagged her a lot, had to share a room with her as she was growing up. We always, as far as closeness, always had our jokes together and teased other family members, good sense of humor. We spent a lot of time enjoying music, the same music.
In episode 25, Connie Land shared her frustration with the investigation and handling of her daughter Sydney Land's 2016 murder in Las Vegas.
Sydney was just a really beautiful girl. She didn't have an enemy in the world, and she was funny and quirky, and she was just a great daughter. She was quiet, but she was still stubborn, but she had this really loving element about her.
These 4 cases run the gamut as far as details and developments go. In Kathy Thomas's case, it's possible a serial killer has escaped justice for over 3 decades. In Libby German's case, despite audio and video of the killer, there's no indication that police are any closer to identifying him. In Anita Dunn's case, an arrest was made, and the legal process played out quickly, resulting in a conviction. In Sidney Land's case, there's a strong suspect, yet due to possible mishandling of the case or corruption, an arrest hasn't been made yet. These 4 cases are just a small portion of the cases we've covered on this podcast so far, but overall, they're representative of the cases that we discuss. When I found out that the families of Kathy Thomas, Libby German, Anita Dunn, and Sidney Land were all going to be together at the June 2019 Crimecon convention, I felt that it would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to meet them all in person, to shake their hands, and give them a hug. I also thought it would be a great chance to see what was happening in each of their loved ones' cases. We sat down and recorded our conversation, and it was very enlightening. It seems as if for each family member I talked with, there were certainly updates to share. For some of the families, there was progress, or positive things to report. But for others, their cases were bogged down, or not moving. We covered a lot of ground in our Sunday afternoon conversation, and I'm so appreciative to Bill Thomas, Kelsey German, Mona Keller, and Connie Land for all taking time to talk with me once again, opening up about their experiences that have been both painful and sad for all of them. Please keep in mind that the conversation you'll be listening to was recorded in a busy hotel with lots of stuff going on. We didn't have a studio or fancy recording equipment, so the audio quality isn't excellent, but I've cleaned it up as much as I can. With that being said, I hope that listeners find the conversation itself trumps any sound issues. You'll hear that conversation in its entirety in just a few moments. As a listener of The Murder in My Family, you understand the impact a murder can have on the lives of those around the victim. The impact of a loss like that touches more people than most realize, and the pain of those who are closest to the victim never really goes away. That's one of the focuses of another true crime podcast I'd like to invite you to check out. It's called Status Pending. It's hosted by Heather Wright and Scott Fuller, who I've worked with in the past on some of the cases similar to those you hear about on this show. Status Pending analyzes unsolved and unresolved cases. They feature a new case each month and break down each case into a 3-episode chapter. Status Pending explores not only the facts of the case, but also delves into theories and the larger issues surrounding their mysteries. Scott and Heather also speak to people who knew the victim, as well as experts in all sorts of areas within criminology. If you're a true crime addict, Status Pending is a must-listen. It's put together well and includes guest, 911 calls, interviews, and more. I also enjoy how in-depth it goes with each victim, and it's compiled in a respectful manner. So be sure to check it out. That's Status Pending, available to subscribe to and listen to everywhere.
I'm Mona Keller. I live in Jasper, Missouri. My sister was murdered back in May of 2016.
My name's Kelsey German. I'm from Delphi, Indiana, which is pretty close to Lafayette. My sister was murdered in February of 2017.
I'm Connie Land. I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and my daughter Sydney Land was murdered October 27, 2016.
And I'm Bill Thomas. I just moved from West Hollywood, California to Norfolk, Connecticut. Big change to a very small, pretty town. And my younger sister Kathy was murdered in October 1986 as part of a series of murders that they refer to as the Colonial Parkway murders.
And so everybody here has been either a guest on the podcast, so it's great to get everybody in one location together. Now, Kelsey's grandparents actually came on the episode we did with her about her, but Kelsey is just an awesome go-getter that's really out there. So I wanted to have her come on and talk about Libby's case. So just to recap, Bill, Kathy's case was episode 1.
Right.
Kelsey, Libby's case was episode 6. Anita's case is episode 14. And Sydney's case was episode 25. So, all right, so if anybody listening will want to go back and listen to any of these episodes, they'll know where they can find them. And we'll put notes in there and everything else. But I guess if we can start off, I guess in the order of the episodes, if you want to start off, Bill, just like a brief, we talked obviously about the case in more detail on the show, but give us a brief description of where things started to where they are now and where the case is at today.
Okay. Well, the Colonial Parkway murders involves the murder of 4 young couples, and 2 of the cases are FBI cases, and 2 of the cases are Virginia State Police cases. And so we're dealing with both agencies. At this point in June 2019, we find ourselves at a very frustrating crossroads for reasons that the families don't completely understand. There are 8 families impacted by this case. The FBI is freezing us out. They have not spoken to us in 18 months. They have refused to take our calls, or texts, or emails, and they, except for a condolence call when my dad died a couple of months ago, they refused to speak to us. This is a complete reversal from where things had been over the last 10 years, where I was speaking to our FBI agent no less than once a week, sometimes several times per week, and we actually had a good-natured policy that if I hadn't heard from her by Friday in a given week, and I'm talking about for several years in a row, if I hadn't heard from her by Friday, we made a point of talking for an hour every single Friday to discuss where things were with the case. So we're not clear at all what's happening with the Colonial Parkway murders at this point. I have to say the Virginia State Police have been more communicative than the FBI, but the FBI are essentially the lead agency at a lot of levels, and we just find ourselves at a very frustrating crossroads.
And we're going to flip that point a little bit and go to Kelsey, because where you've been going through this for 30 years, your sister's case is 2 years old. Tell us a little bit about how things are in that, from where they were on day 1 to where they are now.
Well, in the beginning, my sister actually got a video of her and Abby's killer. So we have his voice and his face, and now there's a sketch. But then about a month ago, they came back and said, well, hey, the sketch isn't the right sketch. So right now, we have a totally different sketch and some more audio and a better video to kind of go off of now. So now we're working with starting completely over from where we were in the beginning.
And do you feel that they have been very cooperative with your family? Are they keeping you updated? I know they were up there on stage, which is a good thing, that they're with your grandfather up on stage and you talking about it. Have they been cooperative in telling you guys what's going on and keeping you updated?
Oh yeah, they definitely tell us as much as they can that they're allowed to tell us. We talk with them. My grandpa talks with them probably once a week, so we're pretty close with them. I'm able to text them and be like, hey, I'm having a really bad day, and they'll talk with me about it when it's in regards to my sister. So we're really close with our law enforcement right now. So it's really cool.
So it's opposites, where you're getting froze out and shut down. You feel like they are still open with you and talking with you, which I always find bizarre. You think there's like a uniform procedure and the way they handle stuff, but that's not the case, unfortunately. And as far as Nita's case, I think what's interesting is when it comes to you, you're on opposite ends of spectrums, because with your case, you had a conviction, you had a wrap-up, whereas in Connie's case, you haven't had. There's a good possibility that you know what happened, but it's not happening where it's getting closed out. So if you could just start off and talk about how it ended up that the conviction came in your case, I'd like to wrap it up on your end to where things haven't been able to materialize in that case.
Well, and we were very blessed. Our local, she lived in Joplin, Missouri, and the Joplin Police Department, she was reported to be missing by her landlord and his wife, who she had worked with, his wife. And after we spoke with the Joplin Police Department and they began investigating, then they quickly determined that her landlord had an outstanding warrant for drug possession, and came to find out that he was on parole for murder in Tennessee. He had spent 25 years in prison in Tennessee for second-degree murder, and he was released in 2008, and in 2016 they followed the trail, and he had murdered her, strangled her, and thrown her into a mine shaft. And they followed her pinging from her phone and located her there. So he was arrested within 4 days, and he confessed, videoed everything that happened, videoed his confession. And we went to trial probably a little over a year and a half later. And within 27 minutes, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder without possibility of parole.
Wow. So there's no such thing as closure, obviously. You had a verdict,
yes. And that's what's
answers.
hard for myself and Anna, my niece, is to hear everyone else's stories on your podcast. I can't imagine what you all are going through. I can imagine 30 years waiting for answers and even not getting them now. So I feel very blessed that we had a wrap-up of this.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Yeah.
You brought up something really interesting. Closure. For me personally, and everyone else your mileage may vary, as they say. I don't believe there is such a thing. But what do you all think? Do you think there can be closure?
No, I don't think so.
I don't feel any closure. I feel like we have him put away, but she's gone. I mean, the victim was my sister Anita Dunn. I'm not the victim. She is.
Right.
And what type of, that's one concern I have is, there's victim compensation programs. How are they going to compensate her? There is no compensation. Everything in the trial, all of the, Tom Lang, I listened to Tom Lang's session here at Crimecon, and all of the evidence wasn't put in. Everything we know about him and his wife is hearsay. That's not right either.
No, it's not. And especially now that he's been convicted, you should have full access.
And I'm having difficulty with that. I have all the police reports, but, we don't have her autopsy. I'm really having difficulty getting
I find that shocking because, and I know other families have run into the same problem. I have a copy of my sister's autopsy report.
Do you
the family version. But in Virginia, where Kathy and the other victims were killed, you have a right to the autopsy
Absolutely.
report. I think it's shocking
Yes.
that in many states around the country, you can't get a copy of your loved one's autopsy report. They give you the cleaned up version. In other words, no graphic photographs and that sort of thing. There are diagrams. And quite frankly, I had to have my older brother, who's a doctor, explain some of the terms to me. I'm just a civilian. But I'm shocked that we can't get police reports. We can't get, in some states, you can't get an autopsy. In Virginia, thankfully, we had a right to an autopsy report, and I spoke to the chief medical examiner, and she was extremely helpful. They see themselves as victims advocates, but that's Virginia. In another state, you're out of luck.
Yes. In Missouri, it's the decision of the coroner, and the coroner will not release it until the court system does, the prosecuting attorney. It was wonderful. She's fabulous. I think her concern right now is he's appealing.
I was wondering.
My discussions with the Department of Corrections are these murderers can appeal for the rest of their lives. There is no limit.
Which leaves you with very little information.
Very little information. So in 50 years, when he's still, in 20 years, when he's still appealing some crazy law, I still want to have an autopsy. I've read the autopsy.
Right.
Before the case was finished, but I have questions. And I want that autopsy.
I say this respectfully. If there are people out there that are comfortable with the word closure, I have no problem with it. But I find that everybody that talks about closure isn't one of us.
Because it's still going on.
Exactly.
It will go on for the rest of our lives.
Sure.
Well, you'll always fight. You'll always fight an appeal. You're going to get a letter when he's going up for appeal.
Right.
If it goes back to court, people go,
right.
well, if they get a conviction, is there any sense of justice? No, because I'm going to go sit in, them shred my daughter apart. I'm going to watch these people that did this to her.
Yes.
They're going to go after appeal, and I'm going to have to go before a parole board, and I'm going to have to, and that is just the second chapter of a living hell that we've had to deal with.
Yes.
There's no closure for anything. It's just a continued fight for the next chapter. So no, there's never any closure, and the wounds are continually reopened for events that happen in our life when our loved ones should be there and they're not.
Yes.
And these criminals are being given all this treatment and all these special privileges
Yes.
and all these things. We don't have any privileges. We have nothing. And we're fighting. And
For
we're
our victims.
Yeah. It's
we will spend
so
the rest
frustrating.
of our lives fighting for our victims.
It's almost that the perpetrator's rights are maybe...
Shane Valentine, the suspect, he's a person of interest. He was arrested after shooting up the occupied structure. He was given 7 to 10 years. I just got a letter from the Nevada State Parole Board. He's going up for parole in July for eligibility of parole in October. And he's a suspect or a person of interest in a double homicide. And he will probably walk. So that's what I get to do, is to try to keep this guy locked up in hopes that he doesn't get out and then they're having to try to catch him to bring him back in.
And you haven't been charged.
He's never been charged, but the problem is there's a lot of serious corruption in our case where Shane has been protected by the police department. We found out that when he threatened to kill Sydney and Nehemiah Kaufman, the other victim, the police never retrieved the bullet that was found when he shot up the house. He said, "I'm going to kill you." He shot into the house. They didn't retrieve the bullet. They closed the case down with eyewitnesses that heard him call him out and said he was a dead man. They said there was insufficient evidence. They closed the case. 3 weeks later, Sydney and Nehemiah were found executed. It was my homicide detective that went back to the Kaufman residence where the original shooting began 3 weeks earlier to pull the ballistics out of the house. Since our case, we have the autopsy report, we have the toxicology report. We don't want photos, but we've got the diagrams and things. Interesting, the autopsy has Sydney in 3 different outfits. One in black pants, black shirt, hot pink bra. Another one is black pants, tan bra, or gray bra, maroon shirt. Another bra is a tan bra. And what the criminal investigator that went to the crime scene, she said it was the bloodiest crime scene I've ever seen. It was absolutely horrific. Well, I know that Sydney didn't die quickly. And she said, the lighting in the apartment was not very good when we did the investigation. I would imagine the reason her clothing colors are different is because the blood dried and she looked different under the lights of the autopsy. She had been dead 36 hours before she died, so the blood was dried on her. What we have found out since we had done the podcast is there was a judge, Melanie Tobias, that had reached out to me in our investigation. What we have found out since then was that she and her daughter have been tied to the suspect, Shane Valentine, 18 months prior to the murder investigation, so that complicates things much further. She interfered in our investigation, and now she has done some very criminal activities in threatening the suspect, kicked in his door, and did some other things on that end. So it's just become so much more convoluted in our case. We found out that the godfather of one of the suspects has actively participated in the investigation. I found out 2 weeks ago that the homicide detective that was leaking information is still currently on the investigation. He hasn't been taken off. And I know, being here at Crimecon, they've severed all communication. The detectives will not talk to me. I have one sergeant that will communicate with me, and he told me if I continue to talk to the media, he's going to have to distance himself from me.
This is exactly the same thing that's happened to us.
I think so too.
The FBI cut off contact, not just with me, but all the criminal murders family I dare to criticize the pace of the investigation at the 30-year mark, mind you. Now, I stand by everything I said, but the FBI does not, and law enforcement in general, do not take criticism well.
No.
And this is sad to say, law enforcement is often extremely vindictive, and they sometimes start to treat family members who are outspoken as if somehow we're the enemy or we're the problem. And, I haven't said this out loud yet, but I'm sure I will in an upcoming meeting. I've been handling the Colonial Parkway murders longer than any of you have been in the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert on all matters related to this investigation, but the idea that they take the attitude, how dare I criticize the pace of their investigation 30 years on. My concern for you, Kelsey, is I want to see your case move forward. And as I said to you this morning, again, we have electronic relationships, and it's so wonderful to be here at Crimecon to actually meet and be face-to-face. But as I said to you this morning, my biggest fear is I don't want you to be me 30 years from now. And I know, I said to you this morning, I know it's even hard for you at age 19 to even think about 30 years from now. But trust me, with a little luck, you'll be happy and healthy 30 years from now. But I sure hope you're not sitting there with a one-time case.
And I'm so glad that right now, that's not what we're going through. Like, I'm really glad we have that really strong relationship with our law enforcement, because I could never imagine going through that kind of thing. So it's been a really... it's not a good experience, but the way that our law enforcement have worked with us has been good considering what is going on. So,
and during our, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and I'm an outsider just listening to all your conversations, but I can't imagine what any of you have felt, because it's never happened to me, but if it was 2 years, 30 years, or anywhere in between, I think that would be an eternity. So I can't imagine if it's only been 2 years in your case or 30 years in your case, how hard that is. It seems like so long.
Well, and what is it? John Walsh from America's Most Wanted for many years says this is the club that no one wants to be invited to join.
No one. Never expected to be in.
Exactly.
And there's 200,000 cold case murders in the United States today that remain unsolved. And so the four of us are just four of us.
And the last thing that any of you all need is to not have the cooperation and the respect of all the people that are trying to solve the crimes. Or the last anybody that is in your shoes need is for them to be able to have this stuff happen on top of it, where it's delaying any kind of answers or outcome. It seems like you shouldn't have to fight with law enforcement and stuff like that to get some kind of results, and you shouldn't have to face consequences for being outspoken. If there's corruption in your case, you shouldn't have to worry or hear they're going to talk to me, tell me what's going on with Sydney's case because I said something about what's going on here. You shouldn't worry about that. Then you shouldn't have to worry about criticizing the FBI and having being frozen out by that. I just think that's very... I think, and I can't speak for all of you, I think we all respect law enforcement.
Yeah,
we all support
absolutely.
them. We all want them to do the best they can. But we all know that they're human and they have egos and they're not perfect. So that's just one thing that really jumps out to me, that I hate to see hurdles thrown in the way of...
After a while, it begins to feel like a fight. To fight for access, fight for information, fight for updates, and it's incredibly frustrating. And I don't consider myself or our 8 families critics of law enforcement. We're pulling for their success.
Yes,
We want
always
to help solve the Colonial Parkway murders, but it can't be a shock to offense in law enforcement that as the years tick by and you can't get information and you can't get access, that you're going to be pushing back, respectfully, but pushing back.
Right. Well, and I think that we all have a common goal. If it's the detectives that have a common goal of finding who did this, We obviously do. There should be some accountability and some cross-checks in place. If there is something that we see that isn't right, then it's better to address that, to keep these cases in the forward motion of being solved. It's not like I'm against the police. I have great people that are working on this case, I would imagine. But when you see things that are not right, how can you sit back and go, I'm not going to say anything? There's some serious discrepancies, and at the end of the day, I'm ultimately responsible for making sure that my daughter receives justice, and that, we keep this not from getting derailed on every... But that doesn't mean that the police, you're right, it doesn't mean that the police are bad, and we are all on the same side, but there needs to be some accountability with the things that are taking place.
And it seems like, so on your end, so far everything's going smoothly, and we hope you never get to there's any of this going on. How did you feel they came to a closure reasonably quickly in Nita's case? How did you feel about how they handled it? Was there anything they dropped the ball on?
No, nothing they dropped the ball on. It was unbelievably fast. I mean, they had every officer, they had the FBI in there, they had the sheriff's department, search and rescue, dogs. They had 70 witnesses or, tips, and they tracked down everything. But ultimately, it led back to the two people that filed that missing persons report. And, during the investigation, they just, they gave us information of where we're going east of town to search. And I want you to know, because there'll probably be media there, but that's all we can tell you. So they were very limited, but they kept us apprised of what they were doing with no definitive information. And then they called, of course, asking for some descriptions, and that they were bringing in divers. So it was just phenomenal. I mean, 11 o'clock at night, our chief of police offered to come 30 minutes out to our house. No, we'll come in. I mean, they were just fabulous, and our law enforcement agencies, all of them. I've spoken with our sheriffs, Jasper County sheriffs, and they were very involved. And then all of our prosecuting attorneys, the entire office, they, throughout the trial process, that's a long, lengthy, I had no idea. And they met with us. There's information they kept to themselves and did not tell us until we were ready to go to trial. And I understood all of that, but they were on it. The victim's advocate emailed me, called me, sat with me every day that we had a pre-trial hearing. I was at every hearing, and they were there, and unbelievable support from that Jasper County prosecuting attorney's office.
It sounds like your sister's case, it worked the way it's supposed to.
Mm-hmm. Picture perfect.
And listening to you, our case stretches back so far. We're actually before DNA, before cell phones, before CODIS, before Victims Advocate. They didn't have any Victims Advocates 32 years ago. They didn't have any of that stuff. And so I was curious, who was it that kept you informed in the early stages of the investigation? Was it?
Our chief of police.
So it's a small enough department. Boy, it's funny. I sit there and I listen and I think to myself, if my parents could have taken this case away from the FBI 30 years ago, they would have, because they're a nightmare. They're incredibly difficult to deal with. They want to know everything I know and everything I'm hearing, and we've really put ourselves out there in the last 10 years to make us families easier to find.
Yes.
They'll pump me endlessly for information, and obviously we give them every tip we receive and so on. But when I ask the most basic questions, and I'm talking about questions I've been asking for answers for 10 years, they will not answer the most basic questions. They just refuse. Their claim is, you hear this now till forever, it's an ongoing investigation.
They don't want to compromise the case.
After 30 years.
That's what they say. And I feel like at this point, our case, Anita's case, really the relationship we had with our police officers is like yours, Kelsey.
Yeah.
We've got a good group there. Maybe it's because it's the smaller areas they all, we're involved with the community. Our Joplin Police Department is very involved. Our Sheriff's Department, and not just with my sister's case, but with all their cases. They're very involved.
It's more hands-on.
It is hands-on.
They know.
Yes.
People know each other.
Their investigators were just fabulous to tell us.
I think even now it's that our county sheriff's department and our Indiana State Police are the ones that are doing most of the work. We only have a handful of FBI agents. So I think maybe that could be part of it too.
So.
That maybe when we...
So why is the FBI involved? Because the FBI, when I asked them to participate in the investigation, because I felt like there were also connections to a current investigation that was going on, they told me that they didn't investigate homicides.
They were in ours because ours are minors.
Okay, that's why.
They have a division who handle kidnappings and
crimes
against minors.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, when you found out, maybe when your parents found out, hey, the big mighty FBI is involved, that's a great thing.
Right.
You're saying now you wish that didn't happen.
Right. Well, and the reason our case was FBI from the very beginning is because Kathy and Becky, the first two victims, were found on federal property. They were in a national park. And that means that the National Park Service Police and the FBI handle it. And as Mike was saying, we regarded that as a good thing.
Yeah.
Now, in retrospect, we do not regard that as a good thing. And one of the things I like about working with local law enforcement, and corruption is obviously, the serious downside. Most of the time, what I hear though is because local law enforcement is accountable to the community, and in some places, sheriffs or other heads of law enforcement agencies are actually elected. So, you have some degree of influence to try to keep abreast of what's happening with your loved one's case, and they have some accountability to the community.
And they are invested in that investigation. Every one of those officers were invested in finding my sister's killer. They did it.
I think that one of my detectives, he genuinely wants to solve this case. I think that when they got thrown into this case, they had no idea everything that was involved in it. And, you want to do right and you want to solve this, and you're looking at all these other variables that make it very difficult to try to solve something. So it doesn't mean he's bad. I think there's a lot of other things. I think the one detective leaking information was bad, but I don't think my other detective is bad, and I think he genuinely wants to solve this. But you look at something that's so overwhelming and difficult to overcome. How do you get past all the obstacles and things that have been said along the way, and mistakes that have been made all along the way? How do you get a conviction, and how do you get this to trial when so much has happened? And so, I think one of the reasons, thank you for inviting us and recommending us to come to Crimecon, because as a mother feeling the media is not supporting this, not a lot of support from the police department, I'm a lone wolf scared to death of who I'm going up against, who I'm looking at a Goliath, and I will put on my shield and I will go fight alone if I have to. But it's been very empowering and very comforting and insightful to be here this weekend to listen to all these different stories, meeting so many different people, and know, all the podcasts, all the speakers, all the different people that are here to support and promote, and everybody here, they were all advocates for us, and that is nice to know. We're not alone, and so you can go around. It's like you can, and so there's so many different things. So to me, I feel much more encouraged because of this weekend. I feel much more encouraged and hopeful in getting the story out, because I know once this story goes silent, this story dies, and I cannot let it die.
Yeah. I feel exactly the same way.
Yeah.
It is great to hear other people's stories and listen, and maybe think, hey, we should try that.
Yeah.
Or even if it's just an inspiring story or a great outcome. You also get to meet the mighty Mike Morford.
The mighty Mike. Awesome. Finally.
Awesome to finally meet him.
Yep.
Well, one thing I wanted to close with was, speaking of advocacy, I know you're all your family's best advocates, cases' best advocates. Sort of just go around and this way, just what have you all done in your own case to sort of advocate for not just your loved one's case, but maybe others that are in the same boat?
Well, one of the most exciting changes, and I think we've been reasonably effective with it, and I hope to continue to use these tools. Social media has been unbelievable, and so our outreach to the community in the Williamsburg area where our cases occurred, for a long time I'd be talking to people in Virginia where I've never lived. People would say, "Oh my gosh, didn't they solve that case?" People have this perception that if they haven't heard about a case in a long time, they either stop thinking about it or they think, "Oh my gosh, somebody was arrested." So it has been so exciting for us to be able to build a Facebook page and have 6,000 followers, which is a lot in a place like Williamsburg and across the country, and to hear from people around the country and or even around the world with expressions of support and what's going on with the case and what can we do to help. And so, I think about how much the opportunities for a group of families working together has changed for the better. And, as you said, to come together in a place like Crimecon, and I was very impressed when we kicked off the other day with Paul Bowles. And of course, it's fun to watch everybody go crazy for a guy who has worked extremely hard to move the Golden State Killer and other cases forward. And in the first 5 minutes, he talked about being victim and family focused, and he talked about respect for the victims. And when you ask questions, remember these are not fictional stories; these are real people. And he also talked about genetic genealogy and the need to try to figure out ways to keep DNA databases open because there are so many cases and there's so much potential there. And so, I don't think he spoke for very many minutes. And they weren't doing an eyeing over him, but I was so impressed with Crimecon, how it's grown, and I think its focus remains on helping tell stories, but also move cases forward.
Yes, and you came, Connie, with brochures made out. What was your mission?
My mission, I didn't go into a lot of the different sessions. My mission solely was to hand out brochures, to share my story, to find contacts to help get this out to the public. So honestly, I didn't experience Crimecon to the magnitude that going and sitting in sessions, because my whole focus, I didn't leave the hotel not once. I haven't gone to see the city at all. My focus was here to meet people, to get the word out about Sydney's murder, and find resources to help me keep it out there in a very big way. I know the only way this case will be solved is through exposure, and there will have to be some accountability, and so that was my goal. It's interesting, we're all in different phases of our 30 years, 2 years. I'm a little over 2 years. She was your sister, daughter, and you already have a conviction. For me, the truth is, Sydney will probably never go to court. That's the reality for me. And I'm okay with that. And so my fight is, I would hate to have it go to court and have evidence get it thrown out, or they get acquitted, or just have a DA that was corrupt and a judge and all the different things. There's so many obstacles in my way. I would hate to sit in a courtroom and watch the people that did this to her, or potentially have done this to her, get up and walk out of the courtroom. That would be very overwhelming for me. I'd rather not know than to do that. So for me, what I'm doing in pushing forward for Sydney is, she's not the only one that's been a victim of the things that have happened. There are a lot of other victims, and so in exposing this, the Kaufman family, I'm fighting for them just as much as I'm fighting for Sydney. And so I think that if my advocacy, although my fight is very focused maybe on Sydney, the advocacy is to bring exposure to a case that really doesn't have a lot of ties to other corruption, but that will bring some accountability and cleaning up the department, some accountability for some actions that maybe have been unethical, and hopefully families that are victims won't be re-victimized, and they will avoid having to go through what we've gone through, because they don't have to fight that I have, because I've got a pretty relentless fight in me. And so for me, that's the advocacy. I think there's a much larger picture in this. It's been nice listening to Mona and the incredible things that she gets to do for her, for her sister, and in honoring her and helping so many families in beautiful, supportive, and incredible ways. And I think that's the opportunity and responsibility for all of us to be able to share our stories. If it saves a daughter, if it saves a relative, if it creates a better relationship, if it opens different lines of communication that may change paths that were not available. I want to share this story, and because I want it to help people. That's what I want. And so that's kind of what I've done. I know there's bigger things that I would like to do, but for now I'm an army of not a lot. I'm me. And so I'm trying to put an army together to help me go forward, where I'm not carrying the weight on this on my own. And so I support my family and different things like that, but that's what we do. But I just know that there are bigger things that we get to do because of this experience, and we would not have done so otherwise. And so what a gift that my daughter, her life and the tragedy that took place, she's in an amazing place. I don't worry about her. And we get to help so many families because of the sacrifice that she made and her life being taken. What a tribute.
And I know, Kelsey, your family has been very out there, very visible. You've been to Crimecon now. Tell us a little bit about everything you and your family have been doing to try and advocate for this.
So we do a lot of media outreach. We talk to HLN, we've been to Dr. Phil, and all of these bigger name places. We also do my social media advocacy. I'm very active on Twitter and Instagram, and I use all of that for, it creates a support system for me, as well as going to Crimecon, and also my grandparents are creating a park in honor of the girls, just to remind our community that the girls still are here, and no matter what, that we have their backs just as much as they have ours. So we do a lot to reach out to the public and talk with different kinds of people and reach out to different demographics. And so that's been really cool to meet people and talk with them about their stories and share our story with them at the same time.
One thing I've noticed about you, and you're everywhere, and I think it's great, is the sister survivors from the Women's State Organization seem to have a real soft spot for you, and I think it's great. And I see your interaction electronically, as we were saying earlier, and I just there's something about that just makes me smile.
Yeah, my relationship with them has definitely evolved since last Crimecon. So I met them here. We were in Nashville, and from the time I met Michelle, meeting siblings of victims, or even victims who are survivors, or anybody who has a story to tell, it's been great to create that bond with them. And I think specifically them, I've created a larger bond, very strong bond with them, more than I've done with anyone else, and that's been really spectacular to see as it grows and it continues to grow, and as they help us to continue to advocate, and as we help them help others. It's been a really good journey with them.
And you're helping with Anita's case, moving it forward to create laws, to change laws. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, moving forward, my goal in knowing the history of this murderer, I want everybody to know her story. I want everyone to know what he did to her, what he did to his first victim, because chances are he'll do it again if he was ever out. And just like with your cases, Bill, they continue to murder.
Sure.
We can't have that. So my goal, beginning very small, is introducing legislation to have a violent offender register. If you're on parole for first and second degree murder, then you're on a register very similar to the sex offender register.
Because you want to know if a murderer is living.
Right, we had no idea. He was her landlord. She worked with his wife
she might have decided not to move there had she known.
Exactly.
No kidding.
Sure.
No kidding.
Sure.
Yeah. Had we known. And, you know, just before she died, she spoke with her mother-in-law that he was coming over there and creeping her out. And, you know, she was getting the heck out of there.
And yet, here's a
that's hearsay.
murderer that, you know, if you had something like a registry, and the sex offender registry is not perfect, but at least you have some tools
Yes.
for parents and community members to know that there's a sex offender living in the neighborhood.
Yes.
Why shouldn't we know about a murderer?
Murder. These are the worst of the worst. You know, several states, Montana, Oklahoma, Kansas, Ohio, Indiana, you know, all of these have a violent offender register, varying degrees. Some are very, they list everyone. Manslaughter, stalking, there's just a wide variety. You know, I'm starting very small. Missouri has nothing. It was very, you know, in my opinion, we were successful. My legislator, Lane Roberts, presented the bill, the House Bill 729, Anita's Law, and we went through 2 committees, and it passed through completely without any issues. Never made it out of committee well, it was very late in the session when I went up to testify. So we're going to refile again in November and keep moving.
Well, having testified in Jefferson City,
Yes.
I'm sure they'll give you a friendly
Yes, they were wonderful. I had
reception.
a very short period of time to get out just what I needed. But they passed the Judiciary Committee is where I testified at.
The second time's the charm, I think. for
Yes,
you all.
yes, I think so.
Well, it sounds like all of you are not giving up. You're all going to continue to go do what you're doing, and you know, I just appreciate you coming on and sharing all of your experiences and stories, and coming on to talk about it.
I should thank you for all you do.
That's
Thank
right.
you for all you do.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Like I said, I'm when I can help somebody speak about something like this, you know, I'm happy to give whatever voice I can and help spread the word about this stuff, because it's not going away, you know, unfortunately, and there's other people out there that are going through the same thing. So.
Well, and for the benefit of your listeners, he's even taller and better looking in person.
That's right.
Absolutely.
I've got a face for radio, but I really, again, I can't thank you all enough. To have you all in one spot, I just wanted to take advantage of this and be able to talk, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of The Murder of My Family. If you enjoyed this episode, please introduce a friend of the podcast and invite them to listen. And before you go, remember that every murder victim means something to somebody.